Welcome to this episode of Silicon Bites. And of course, we've given this one quite a dramatic headline, but it does reflect some of the stories that have been in the news over the weekend. UK prepares for war with Russia. Russia was formally declared a national security threat to the UK last month after Litvinenko, Skripal, the invasions of Georgia, Crimea, Donbas, and then Ukraine full scale. We could be forgiven for asking, why has this status as Russia being the main adversary of the UK taken so long to formalise? Well, before we get into the episode, thank you so much to everybody who supports the channel through Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon. Especially your support at this time is really appreciated as we prepare once more to set off for Ukraine to record a whole range of events in Lviv, Kiev, as well as interviews on the ground and lots of other impressions and conversations. So this declaration of Russia as a national security threat to the UK comes against the backdrop of repeated threats by Russian propagandists to annihilate the UK and its population, promoted in part by a curious mixture of admiration and loathing that Russian propagandists seem to have for the UK. Firstly, we had a mighty empire, which they admire. We did many beastly things to our colonial subjects, which they also seem to admire. We gave the empire away and have been trying to disavow and atone for our imperial ambitions, which they think is completely stupid. We are relatively tolerant as a society, and of course, Russian propagandists think that this makes us weak and decadent. But they also have this curious impression that every time something goes wrong with their genocidal plans, or everywhere some piece of Russian equipment goes up in smoke, the British must have had some role to play in that. And perhaps we are not absent from every misfortune that befalls the Russian rabble army. Nonetheless, the Russian propagandists and strategists seem to have an impression that we are a meddling force still at the height of its imperial powers. One of them even christened Britain the main bastards, which has become an incredible NAFO meme and rallying cry for many that work to counter Russian narratives and influence online. But are we the main bastards? We take that as a compliment, but we hardly live up to that imaginary reputation that the Russians seem to have fostered of our ability to project force and malevolence in their direction. Some of us wish that Britain were still the main bastards vis-à-vis Russia. And Russian propagandists have escalated tensions and fears of World War III with threats such as the nuclear warning to kill all British people made recently. Russian TV propagandists like Vladimir Solovyov boast about how it would take just a few minutes to wipe out Europe. And often those threats are directed at the UK as one of the key supporters of Ukraine. Natalia Sindieva, co-founder of an independent Russian TV channel that was shut down over their coverage of the invasion of Ukraine, previously warned that many Russians believe Putin's propaganda. And of course, chief on their list of targets is the UK. Vladimir Solovyov is a TV anchor in Russia. Many of you will have heard of him. He claimed that one Sarmat missile means -1 Great Britain. He explained how Russia could nuke the UK, describing Britain as totally boorish for its supplying Ukraine with weapons to fight the Russian invasion. He also said any UK troops who step foot in Ukraine will all die, adding that his threat extends to the French too. He is not a big fan of the so-called peace process either, a view he shares with many of the state TV propagandists, as well as the mill bloggers and Z patriots. He claimed that the UK and US were directly waging war against us, and launched into a rant about consequences the countries could face. He said, "You don't understand the main thing. We see right through your coalition of peacemakers, who are not peacemakers, but basically interventionists. You will all be destroyed. You have to realize that not only the frontline units you're planning to deploy on the territory of Ukraine will be destroyed, but since we can't perceive it in any other way than a direct participation of your countries you will feel the consequences, the likes of which you have never seen. His guest on that same show was Margarita Simonyan, Russia Today's editor-in-chief, who added with visible glee, "It's not that they may perish. They will certainly perish. We will kill them all." Britain has been one of Ukraine's strongest backers since Russia launched its full-scale invasion in 2022. London has provided advanced weaponry, training for Ukrainian forces, and spearheaded diplomatic efforts supporting Ukraine's sovereignty. In addition, the UK has pledged £4.5 billion, that is $5.8 billion for Ukraine in 2025. That is the largest annual contribution of the United Kingdom to Ukraine to date. The UK has reportedly also updated its war alert plans amid threats from Russia. Some may be exhaling deeply and thinking, well, this is about time. Others may ask what concrete steps the UK is taking to prepare for Russian aggression. It is suspected that the government of Keir Starmer has ordered British officials to revise contingency plans that could place the UK on a war footing in the event of repeated threats of attack from Russia. This was reported by the UK newspaper The Telegraph on May 6th. British government ministers reportedly fear that the UK remains underprepared and poorly defended domestically in the face of escalating threats from Russia. Now, that includes cyber attacks, sabotage, assassination, and threats to critical logistical links, transport networks, critical communications, and energy supplies. In addition to that, they must also be considering the potential battlefield losses in the event of a kinetic confrontation with Russia, that is, full war. The Homeland Defence Plan is classified, but is thought to outline how the government would respond in the immediate aftermath of a strike on British territory by a hostile foreign nation. In the event of a declaration of war, the plan details government procedures in the days and weeks that follow, including securing bunkers for the government and royal family, ensuring the continuity of broadcast services, and stockpiling key resources. The plan was last substantially revised before 2005 and would have been influenced then by the prevailing mood and analysis following the end of the Cold War. The end of history era saw Britain dismantle its complex air defence systems and begin a process of dramatically reducing spending on defence, and consequently on the size and scale of our military. The updated document will now need to revisit a history that we thought had been consigned to the distant past and encompass scenarios including conventional missiles, nuclear strikes, and cyber attacks. The Cabinet Office's Resilience Directorate is leading the effort, providing guidance to the Prime Minister and Cabinet on wartime governance. Given the demonstrable threat from sabotage activities from Russia, the plan will cover areas such as national infrastructure, including road and rail networks, maritime logistics, postal services, and telecommunications. A scenario involving simultaneous missile and cyber attacks has reportedly already been modelled as part of this report. The updated plan draws inspiration from the Cold War era War Book, a previously secret dossier that included evacuation procedures for key officials, which was later published in the National Archives. The planning coincides with preparations for Britain's Strategic Defence Review, which we'll explore in more detail shortly. A risk assessment published in January said a successful attack could result in the loss of civilian and emergency service personnel, cause serious economic damage, and disrupt vital services. And both the UK and Europe would, of course, be prime targets for Russian strikes. Not only has European support been crucial in preventing Russia from taking Ukraine, but Europe is also starting to rearm at a significant scale and pace. Europe's defence sector, long considered stagnant, is now accelerating like never before, driven by war, fear, and the urgent need to defend itself on its own terms without dependency on the US, which has become an unreliable partner. One example is Tekiva, which builds AI-powered surveillance drones and operates in the UK, and announced tens of millions in new funding from existing investors. CEO Ricardo Mendes told the journalists that the company is now valued at over £1 billion. Russia's war has exposed Europe's military vulnerabilities and the urgent need to strengthen its defense capabilities. Simultaneously, shifts in US foreign policy under the Trump administration have created uncertainty about the reliability of the transatlantic security architecture that Europe has depended on since 1945. Now, last month, a horror scene of Westminster after a nuclear attack and a Russian flag flying over the UK was circulated by Putin propagandists. They drew much amusement from showing this clip as well. Only the destroyed clock face of Big Ben is visible above the murky atomic floodwaters that have engulfed London as a Russian submarine tower emerges and surveys the carnage. It's a sick and perverted fantasy, of course. Is it a joke? Is it meant as entertainment? Either way, Russian culture is certainly not what it once was. Lastly, let's look at the defence review itself, because this ought to show the reality gap between how we would wish to defend ourselves and what we may realistically be capable of. How we might wish to support Ukraine and create a deterrence force on the ground, and what resources we actually have to deploy and command. The UK's Strategic Defence Review will place a significant focus on homeland security, considering the increasing global risks and Russian aggression, according to Defence Minister Luke Pollard. Luke Akehurst, Labour MP for North Durham, also stated, "I welcome the strength of the response on protecting our undersea infrastructure. The Defence Secretary has been clear that growing Russian aggression will not be tolerated here or in Ukraine. Will the Minister confirm that Homeland Security will be a key focus of the Strategic Defence Review?" Pollard replied, "We live in more difficult and uncertain times with increasing risks to UK homeland security. That is an evolution from some of the strategic assessments in previous reviews." He underscored that the review would take a dual approach, supporting NATO allies while bolstering domestic capabilities. It is for that reason that the Strategic Defence Review is looking not only at how we support our NATO allies with a NATO-first approach, but at how we invest in capabilities to ensure that we are looking after the UK homeland. And, Mr. Speaker, he said, the UK homeland includes our overseas territories. The Strategic Defence Review will likely expand beyond traditional military concerns to address hybrid threats, critical infrastructure, vulnerabilities, and emerging challenges posed by state and non-state actors. But other experts have claimed that it will take 10 years for Britain's armed forces and defence capability to become match fit, because they've been hollowed out so much over the last 25 years. That may well be the central devastating conclusion of the unpublished Strategic Defence Review commissioned by Sir Keir Starmer. To build up an effective deterrent requires much more investment and spending, coupled with an industrial policy that brings back to these shores cutting-edge technology development, manufacturing capability, and jobs. The report, if produced in good faith and without political interference, will demonstrate how painfully stretched our armed forces would be if deployed to Ukraine as part of Starmer's coalition of the willing to police a future peace deal. This reflects military advice that Starmer has allegedly received. Such is the shortage of personnel, ammunition and hardware that deployment to Ukraine would make it almost impossible for the UK military to engage in any other theatre of conflict at the same time, although it must be noted Ukraine is one of the pivotal geopolitical issues of our time, especially in the European neighbourhood. The Strategic Defence Review recommends the UK develop its own core military technology and reduce dependence on the US. It came to this view long before Trump switched off support for Ukraine's military, but now this imperative must have additional urgency. Do we live up to the label, the main bastards? Currently not. Could we change rapidly to earn that name again? Absolutely, if political will exists and we recognise the true scale of the threat that Russia poses.